In 1955, the United Kingdom becomes the backdrop for a dark tale that unfolds over 5 decades. It begins with the rise of beloved TV shows and culminates in shocking revelations that would emerge years later. We all remember those classic programs, those shows that brought smiles to our faces, hosted by charismatic figures who became household names. But behind the glittering lights,
and it's coming up, not just yet, in a second now,
and cheerful faces, lies a far darker truth. Fame gave these hosts power, access, and influence. But for some, that power was wielded for something much darker and terrifying.
Jimmy Savile used to come to Duncroft. He used to take us girls out. We loved it when he came. Everybody knew he was a perv, and everybody knew that he was going to be groping and wanting sex and wanting other worse things than just plain sex.
Meet James Wilson Vincent Savile, better known as Jimmy Savile. He was born on October 31st, 1926, in Leeds, a city in the north of England. He was raised by his mother, Agnes, whom he called the Duchess, and his father, Vincent. Jimmy was the youngest of 7 children, and he was often seen as the spoiled one. But his family, like many others during the Great Depression, faced hard times. On top of this, Jimmy had several illnesses as a child. When he was just 2 years old, he nearly died from a serious case of pneumonia. He grew up as a Catholic and went to a strict Catholic school in Leeds. Despite this, Jimmy was known for being rebellious and mischievous. He wasn't good in school and had a reputation for being hard to handle. Teachers found him difficult, but there were no clear signs yet of the darker behavior he would later show. At the age of 14, Jimmy had to leave school and start working because his family was struggling financially. This was common for many working-class families at the time. During World War II, Jimmy was sent to work in the coal mines to help with the war effort. Coal was crucial for powering Britain during the war. While working underground, he suffered a serious back injury from an explosion, which he later said took years to heal. The work was tough, and the isolation of the mines left a big impact on him. At least, that's what he claimed. He later used this injury as an excuse for spending so much time in a spinal injury hospital, something I'll explain soon. Jimmy often exaggerated parts of his life, a habit that continued throughout his public career. He mixed real stories with made-up ones to build and maintain his public image.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jimmy Savile.
After World War II, Jimmy moved into the entertainment world. He started by playing records at dance halls in Manchester and then worked his way up into management. Eventually, he became successful. He climbed the ranks and got a job as a radio DJ. In 1958, at 32 years old, he began working for Radio Luxembourg. During this time, Jimmy built a reputation not just for his talent, but also for his strange and flashy personality. In 1960, he made his first TV appearance as the DJ on a show called Young at Heart. His energy was contagious, and he won over many viewers. Because of his larger-than-life personality, Jimmy was hired by the BBC as the first ever host of the famous Top of the Pops TV show in 1964. The BBC stands for British Broadcasting Corporation. Then, from 1975 to 1994, he hosted his own show called Jim'll Fix It, a show that my aunt once applied to be on something that will become chilling as the story unfolds. Jim'll Fix It was a primetime TV show that aimed to make children's dreams come true. Kids would write letters to Jimmy, hoping their wishes would be granted. For 19 years, Jim'll Fix It captured the hearts of a generation, and every child dreamed of having their moment on the show. The children who appeared on the show were given a special medal that said "Jim fixed it for me," a treasure they proudly wore. From the days of Jim'll Fix It until his death in 2011, Jimmy was known as a kind-hearted philanthropist and was beloved by many in Britain.
With cigar in hand, terrible jokes, but no matter what, everybody that he came across, with its staff, patients, felt better for the encounter with Jim.
He was famous for his charity work, raising large sums of money for hospitals like Leeds General Infirmary and Broadmoor. He had been helping these hospitals since the 1960s, working as a porter and supporting the staff, while also leading many fundraising campaigns.
So I've got time to try and get hold of £10 million with the help of my lovely friends in Great Britain.
His public image as a generous person was solidified by the awards and recognition he received. He was awarded an OBE in 1971 and even received a knighthood in 1990. It's estimated that he raised over £40 million for charity. In 1968, Jimmy started working at Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital that housed dangerous criminals with serious mental illnesses. Even though he had no medical qualifications, he was given an honorary executive role and sat on the hospital's management board, where he had a lot of influence.
I have got very formal qualifications. I've been alive for a long time. I've learned a lot of things for a long time.
In addition to his work at Broadmoor, Jimmy also worked as a teaching assistant at Duncroft Boarding School for Girls. Because of his fame, Jimmy made connections with powerful people throughout his life, including King Charles III and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. On several occasions, Prince Philip even went to him for marriage advice for him and Queen Elizabeth II. Jimmy also hosted something called the Friday Morning Club. This was a coffee gathering at his penthouse, which overlooked Roundhay Park. Jimmy's friends, including high-ranking police officers, would meet there regularly. The club ran for more than 20 years. In 2011, just 2 days before his 85th birthday, Jimmy Savile passed away, and he was celebrated as a national treasure. But soon after his death, a dark truth came to light.
And we got lots of cigarettes. He used to bring about 1,000 cigarettes with him at the time. And of course, cigarettes was the currency in that kind of environment. So girls just flocked around him, and he bought sweeties, and sometimes he bought perfume, and he bought makeup. A lot of things were duty-free. And he just lavished gifts on everybody and was all jolly. And then he wanted people to come out for a ride with him in his car.
In 2012, an ITV documentary exposed Jimmy as a notorious predator, revealing a shocking history of abuse that stretched over 6 decades.
There were very few women in management positions. Women found it difficult to report sexual harassment.
It was discovered that he had victimized over 600 people, ranging in age from 5 to 75.
She's so lovely, she's so beautiful and pretty. I don't think, explain to her, I do not think we will let her go back to Japan. I think we will keep her for ourselves. We keep you here all the time.
She wants to stay in London too.
She wants to stay. I've got myself a girlfriend. Wow. Listen, now then. As you can see, I have 2 young ladies. They look like a pair of bookends because they are identical, you see. And some weeks ago, my friend on the left here, I did say, it's one of my girlfriends. So she has something to say back, which is...
This is my boyfriend.
Oh, so she said it, you see. Good, you did well there.
Investigations uncovered crimes across 28 hospitals, including a specialist spinal hospital, Leeds General Infirmary, Broadmoor, and Duncroft School. Although he seemed to be helping staff, patients, and students, Jimmy had unchecked access to extremely vulnerable people who were disabled, schizophrenic, paralyzed, or children. But because the allegations only came to light after his death, Jimmy never had to face trial. Many people were aware of what Jimmy was doing, and some even tried to expose him earlier. This video can't cover every accusation due to the vast scale of Jimmy Savile's crimes, but we'll focus on some of his earlier offences and the victims who bravely shared their stories.
I opened the door and I walked in, and Savile was sat in the chair with the right side of his body facing me. and there was a girl of about 14 with long brown hair, sat on his knee. He had his left arm up her skirt, and he was kissing her, but what I distinctly remember, and that's the image that sticks in my mind, was the fact as I opened the door, he turned his head, and it was just his tongue that was just sort of coming out of her mouth that stuck in my mind. It was that image, so it wasn't just like a peck on the cheek that she jumped on his knee and sort of done it spontaneously. It was a definite sexual advance to this girl.
The first known incident of abuse took place in 1955. At 24 years old, Jimmy was managing lunchtime and evening dances at dance halls in Manchester, where he had easy access to vulnerable young people. At one of these events, a case of abuse was reported. Manchester police investigated, but the victim did not receive the attention or care they needed. Eventually, the case was dropped due to lack of evidence, leaving the victim without justice.
The fella could get used to all this. I think I'm doing it, could get used to it. So, ladies and gentlemen, all we can say is good night from all of us here on Top of the Pops, and it's #1 time, and of course, if you believe me now, it's from the one and only Chicago. And thank you very much indeed.
I actually couldn't do anything because there was all people around, and we were on steps, and he was there, and I couldn't move because there was too many people around, and the camera was right up in front of us, so no, I couldn't get away. I told the man that was next to the cameraman, and he just told me to get lost. He said, that's just Jimmy, go away.
When Jimmy was asked about the accusations, he brushed them off. He claimed that as a DJ he had, in his words, cues of women wanting to be his groupies, making light of the serious allegations against him. Some of his colleagues even repeated this in the following years, minimizing the claims. 5 years later, Jimmy was accused of assaulting a 10-year-old boy. The boy had recognized Jimmy outside his hotel and asked for an autograph. Jimmy agreed, but with one condition. The boy was taken to a quiet area of the hotel, where he was assaulted. Then, in 1965, Jimmy assaulted another 14-year-old girl at his home. He had picked her up from a nightclub, and despite her rejecting him, he forced himself on her. In 1972, he groped 3 12-year-olds in the backstages of Top of the Pops, 2 girls and 1 boy. The list of anonymous reports, which were not taken seriously at the time, is extensive. However, the following testimonies reveal the disturbing reality of how Jimmy abused countless individuals in great detail. In 1972, Susan was a 21-year-old trainee optician in Leeds. Her surname remains anonymous. Jimmy Savile was a local celebrity in his 40s and was a customer at the practice where she worked. Susan first encountered him during an eye test in the basement of the optician's practice. She found him to be unsettling from the start. He smoked throughout the entire session, and despite making her feel uncomfortable, she didn't feel like she was able to ask him to stop. Jimmy then requested a home visit to fit his glasses, but he spoke to the management and specifically asked for the quote, the one with the big knockers and the short skirt. This was Susan. Susan was then sent alone to his home in a taxi. When she arrived, Jimmy locked the door behind her. His house was filthy and cluttered with dirty tracksuits, empty cereal boxes, and piles of medallions. Jimmy wore an open tracksuit top, exposing his bare chest. As Susan adjusted his glasses, he groped her and forced his tongue into her mouth. When she resisted, Jimmy exposed himself. This lasted for several minutes before he returned to normal. He attempted to soothe over the incident with his charisma and his charm. He even asked her to be interviewed for his BBC One radio program, Savile's Travels. Shocked and confused, Susan naively agreed. Susan believes that this may have been a way of asserting control or preempting any accusations.
I don't
think at the time it occurred to me that he was an old man in a young environment. But subsequent to me having the meeting, or whatever you might want to call it, in my 20s, that's when it became it's like a dirty old man, trying to mix with young people.
After the attack, Jimmy drove her back to work in his Jaguar, honking the horn and waving at passers-by. Back at the opticians, Susan told her manager and her colleagues what had happened, but they just laughed and dismissed her claims. She didn't report the incident to the police. She also didn't tell her parents, as she felt deeply ashamed. Years later, Susan saw Jimmy again in a Leeds park and confronted him about the attack. He denied even recognizing her and dismissed her claim. She continued to speak about her experience to friends and colleagues. Some even confided in her that they had also been victimized by Jimmy Savile, or that they knew of his predatory behavior, but they refused to come forward. After all, who would believe them? Jimmy was pretty much beloved by the entire nation. In early 1974, Jimmy Savile attended the Duncroft boarding school in Surrey. This was an all-girls school with pupils under the age of 16. On his visits, he became acquainted with a 14-year-old pupil named Karen Ward. Karen was born on the 25th of March 1954. She had a troubled upbringing, and her stepfather often essayed her. Unfortunately, her relationship with Jimmy was similar to that of her stepfather. Jimmy would come by in his Rolls-Royce. Girls would flock to him when he arrived and cleaned and polished his car. They knew him from the television. Their reward for cleaning his car was to have a ride out with Jimmy. During these rides out, Jimmy always made sure that he had a full carton of duty-free cigarettes in the back so he could hand them out to his temporary visitors, along with alcohol. Karen was reluctant to get involved at first, but over time she became one who would ride out with him. The headmistress of the school, Margaret Jones, permitted her students to be alone with Jimmy, as she was also starstruck by his presence, and for some reason, allowed this to happen. Karen went out several times with Jimmy. Jimmy would get about 5 miles down the road before pulling into a secluded lay-by. While there, he would fondle, mole, and grope at her chest. He also placed his hands up her skirt, but the attacks didn't stop there. He would persuade Karen to do more with the bribe of coming onto his TV show.
He asked me for oral sex, and I didn't want to. And he promised me that if I gave him oral sex, that he would arrange for me and my friends to go to Television Centre and be on his television show.
He vowed one day that if she gave him oral, she could come along with him to the BBC television studios. He was so violent during the act that she gagged profusely and had to open the passenger door to be sick. And he would do this with many, many girls at the school. On the 7th of March 1974, Karen and 4 other girls were taken to London and were on an episode of Clunk Clink. The girls on the show were 15 at the time, and Jimmy had a 32-year-old comedian guest on called Freddie Starr. Jimmy Savile allowed his associate Freddie Starr to essay them on the backstage of the show. Freddie groped the girls while mocking their appearance by commenting on their flat chests. Freddie provided them with vodka and rum before subjecting them to further essay. Just like Jimmy Savile, Freddie Starr never saw the punishment that he deserved. In 1977, a 9-year-old club scout named Kevin Cook was thrilled to be a part of his group's appearance on Jim'll Fix It. The day was filled with excitement as the children played games and threw eggs at each other. Kevin remembered it as an unforgettable experience, calling it the best day ever. As the filming wrapped up, the group learned that they would only receive one badge to share amongst themselves. This disappointed the children, who had hoped for their own keepsake. After the announcement, Savile approached Kevin directly and offered him the badge. Savile asked, "Would you like to earn your own badge?" Kevin later believed that Savile chose him because his mother had given the presenter a tie as a gift. Savile led Kevin to his dressing room. The room was dark and dingy. Once inside, Savile essayed the boy. During the assault, a second man entered the room. Kevin couldn't identify the man, but he vividly remembers being struck by him. Savile then issued a brief warning before acting like nothing had even happened.
Fooled everyone. He had adults eating out of his hand. He had the persona about him, you know.
For decades, Kevin kept this a secret. On the same show, another girl was invited backstage with Jimmy. She was forcibly pushed into a dark, dingy alcove and groped and mauled. This escalated as she was placed on the floor and held down by his weight. Jimmy then forced himself upon her. This case was anonymous, but he was in his 40s and she was underage. From the years 1977 to 1981, a young, innocent girl named Samantha Brown was abused by Jimmy. This began when she was 11 and lasted until she was 15. Sam would always attend the church at Stoke Mandeville Hospital with her parents and little brother. Jimmy would also go to this church, but because he was deemed an important person, he would go to the presbytery overlooking the ceremony. Young Samantha Brown collected the plates from the presbytery to pass them around the congregation for donations. Each time she had to go into the room, she saw Jimmy Savile, and every single time he made advances. Every time he saw her, he would put his arms around her when greeting her, and then he would start stroking her back. But as more time went on, this physical touching escalated. He began placing his hand on her legs, and then up her skirt. This then escalated even further. Jimmy would penetrate her with his fingers and place his whole hand down her throat, to the point where she struggled to breathe. Samantha felt like she couldn't tell anyone what was happening, but she tried her best to make it difficult for Jimmy. She frequently argued with her parents to avoid wearing her Sunday best skirt, but she never let her parents know why she didn't want to wear the skirt. She would also protect herself by wearing multiple layers of underwear. Jimmy would also leave the door ajar during these attacks, deriving a twisted thrill from the risk of being caught. Samantha would look at the priest and pray for him to notice what he was doing. This tormented her for decades, and she felt like she couldn't tell anyone. Another woman, referred to as Jane, told the BBC that Jimmy attacked her when she was a 16-year-old patient at Leeds General Infirmary. Jane recounted that Jimmy took her to a local shop to buy sweets and magazines, making her feel like the chosen one. However, shortly after, he essayed her in the hospital basement. She explained that a member of staff at the hospital led her to an area where Jimmy was waiting behind a closed door. He pulled her in immediately and started to kiss her with his tongue. At the same time, his left hand went to grab her thigh under her dress. The entire incident lasted no longer than 5 or 6 minutes. Jane said there wasn't a time to even draw a breath or process what was happening, because it all happened just so quickly. After he was done, Jimmy told her, "You have to go." It was clear to her that he had done this before.
Kissed her, and I thought he was a visitor coming to see her, and he started rubbing his hands down her arms, and then I don't know of a nice way to put it, but he molested her.
Following the attack, Jane said that she felt dirty and ridiculously stupid. She attempted to confide in nurses, but they just laughed, making it impossible for her to even finish her account. Only her mother truly believed her. Jane stated that everybody knew what was happening. All of the staff accepted it, patients accepted it, and clearly other members of staff did as well. And next we have June and Jennifer Gibbons, famously known as the Silent Twins. They were born in 1963. Their parents came to Britain during the Windrush generation. They were hatred and discrimination due to being black. But in 1982, they acted out against their community by going on a 5-week spree of arson, burning many houses and shops in their hometown. At the age of 19, the two were arrested and sent to Broadmoor. In Broadmoor, Jimmy Savile ruled the roost. He had his own living quarters and his own set of keys, and even unrestricted access to the most vulnerable people in society. One time, Jimmy was passing through the hospital in nothing but a dressing gown and stumbled upon the twins. He jumped onto their table and looked them directly into the eyes. He pointed at June and said, "I'll have you first." He then pointed at Jennifer and said, "I'll have you second." The staff actually witnessed this interaction, but nothing was reported. No one held him accountable, and the full scale of his crimes he inflicted on patients remains unknown. Of a few which are known, while at Broadmoor, Jimmy assayed a woman inside his motorhome, which he stationed on the hospital grounds. On one occasion, a TV documentary crew was following Jimmy around the grounds, when all of a sudden he was stopped by a patient. This patient was asked to draw an image of Jimmy Savile. The drawing wasn't very flattering and made him out to be evil. Jimmy then asked the girl, "What have I done to deserve this?" The patient responded with, "Everything." Jimmy just laughed and looked at the camera and said, "If you haven't worked in a hospital, you haven't lived."
It's supposed to be me, that. What did I ever do to you that you would draw that picture of me?
Everything.
Super times for all. No danger about it. In fact, let me tell you, if you don't work in a hospital, you really are missing something. In fact, you're missing everything.
Nobody was safe from Jimmy Savile, not even his great niece, Caroline Robinson. She revealed that she was molested twice by her uncle, a man revered within the family as an untouchable and saintly figure.
I decided to carry on because I had such like a short skirt on. Because I didn't want to spoil my best dress, I lifted my skirt up, so I just sat with him on with my knickers and, in my little skirt. And the more he rubbed his hand up and down my back and went closer towards my pants, I thought, something's hard here, something's uncomfortable. What am I sat on? Like khakis or whatever, I thought. So the more I wiggled, the more excited Jimmy got. And next minute I know his hand is on my bum.
He touched her breasts at a christening party when she was aged 15 and tried to persuade her to touch his privates on another occasion. Renowned actress Julie Fernandez describes how she was groped by Jimmy Savile while sitting in her wheelchair at the BBC when she was just 14, and she was sat in a room full of people. Throughout the years, more and more accusations were leveled against him, but these accusations led to nowhere. In 1990, Jimmy Savile gave an interview to The Independent, dismissing the attention he received from young girls as nothing more than innocent admiration. He claimed that these girls weren't drawn to him for who he was, but because of his connections to the celebrities they adored. "I have no interest in them," he insisted. A decade later, in 2000, Savile was featured in a Louis Theroux documentary. The film offered rare glimpses of his darker side, subtly hinting at his manipulative behavior. Although Theroux was initially skeptical, he later admitted that Savile had convinced him, even earning his admiration at one point. But as time passed and more accusations surfaced, Savile's public persona started to crack. Instead of retreating, he became more aggressive in his defense, refusing to acknowledge the mounting evidence against him. In 2008, Jimmy Savile took legal action against journalists who linked him to abuse at a children's home in Jersey. He vehemently denied ever being there, but his lie quickly unraveled when photographs emerged showing him at the home, surrounded by children. Savile didn't stop there. He threatened newspaper editors, warning them that exposing him would put his charity work at risk, and that his powerful connections would silence them. Even law enforcement wasn't spared from his intimidation. In 2009, when questioned by police over allegations at Duncroft School, Savile coldly warned 2 female officers, "If this accusation does not disappear, my policy will swing into action. I've alerted my legal team, And if we go to court, you ladies will end up at the Old Bailey. Adding to the dark rumors surrounding him, one of his former colleagues revealed disturbing stories about Savile's alleged necrophilia. He had reportedly been given access to a morgue and visited it frequently. A month after Jimmy Savile's death, the BBC aired a tribute program in his honor. However, around the same time, a Newsnight investigation into his criminal activities had been scheduled to air. The documentary featured first-hand accounts from numerous victims, giving them an opportunity to finally speak out. But the BBC made a controversial decision to shelve the Newsnight broadcast, effectively silencing the victims once again. Instead of allowing these voices to be heard, the BBC chose to glorify Savile one last time. This was seen as a deliberate attempt to cover up the truth and withhold vital information that was in the public's interest. Information the BBC, as a trusted national broadcaster, had a responsibility to provide. It wasn't until ITV aired its explosive 2012 documentary that the full extent of Savile's crimes triggered a wider investigation. In stark contrast, the BBC, despite being well aware of the atrocities he had committed, defended its refusal to investigate a dead man, dismissing it as distasteful. The truth, however, was undeniable. The investigation revealed 126 cases of sexual assault and 34 counts of penetration. Shockingly, 73% of the victims were under 18 years old. Of the penetration offences, 26 were committed against females and 8 against males. In the wake of ITV's documentary, the floodgates opened and over 600 known accusations surfaced. However, it's believed there may be many more victims, either too ashamed to come forward or who have already passed away. The BBC, NHS, and various government agencies were left facing intense scrutiny for their role in enabling and covering up his heinous actions. As the truth came to light, Jimmy Savile's many honours were swiftly stripped away, and his television shows were pulled from re-airing. The man who had once been celebrated as a national hero was revealed to be one of Britain's most prolific and despicable criminals. His final resting place in Scarborough became the site of further disgrace, with his headstone eventually removed and destroyed. But perhaps the greatest tragedy lies in the fact that the victims of his crimes have never truly received the justice they deserve. Savile, who died without showing any remorse, was a callous man who lived and died surrounded by a web of enablers. From his friends and family to colleagues, hospital staff, teachers, police, and even the BBC and the British royal family, many turned a blind eye to his actions, allowing him to continue his reign of abuse unchecked for decades. For many of Savile's victims, the pain has never truly faded. They continue to try and lead normal lives, but the shadow of what he did hangs over them, turning each day into a struggle. You might think that Savile was a rare anomaly, someone who slipped through the cracks of the British Broadcasting Corporation. But this couldn't be further from the truth. His story is far from unique. The reality is that there are many others within the BBC and other powerful institutions who have escaped scrutiny, enablers who allowed these crimes to continue unchecked. And as we know, this is only the beginning. There is much more to uncover.